It happened in an instant, but it felt like the world slowed down. I was heading toward the laundry room carrying a stack of folded towels when Zachary appeared from the bathroom, a towel slung low around his hips, steam rising from his skin. "Hey, Charlotte," he said casually, stepping aside to let me pass. I glanced at him briefly, muttering a polite, "Hi," before trying to focus on the task at hand. But then it happened. The knot of his towel slipped, and before either of us could react, it dropped to the floor. He froze, and so did I. My gaze flickered, just for a second, a reflex I couldn't stop, and in that moment, I saw him in a way I was never supposed to. He started, his voice breaking the silence as he bent to grab the towel. "I didn't see anything," I blurted out, turning away so fast that I nearly dropped the towels I was holding. "Right," he said, his voice strained. "Sorry about that." By the time I dared to look back, he had wrapped the towel around himself again, his cheeks as red as mine probably were. Neither of us said anything else, but the air between us felt heavier, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. It was an accident, just a fleeting, awkward moment. But as I walked away, my heart racing and my skin flushed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Life with Richard had always been predictable. Our marriage wasn't a love story. It was a partnership, practical and stable. He was a businessman through and through, his focus always on the next deal, the next client, the next opportunity. I'd admired that about him at first, his drive, his ambition. But over time, it left little room for us. The house was large and modern, perched on the edge of the countryside. Its sleek lines and polished surfaces were more Richard's taste than mine, but I made it a home as best as I could. Most days, though, it felt too big, too quiet. Richard spent more time at work than here, and when he was home, he was usually buried in emails or conference calls. Zachary moved in shortly after finishing college. At 24, he was in that uncertain stage of life, searching for direction while trying to figure out who he was. Richard insisted he stay with us until he got on his feet, though I suspected it had more to do with control than concern. Richard had always been critical of Zachary, pushing him toward paths that didn't fit, trying to mold him into the son he wanted rather than the one he had. I hadn't spent much time around Zachary before he moved in. He'd lived with his mother, Karen, on the other side of the country for most of his life. When Richard and I married, Zachary was a quiet teenager who barely looked up from his phone long enough to say hello. But the man who walked through the door that day was someone entirely different. Zachary was tall and broad-shouldered, with an easy confidence that belied the uncertainty of his circumstances. His dark hair was perpetually tousled, and his blue eyes had a way of looking right through you, like he could see things you didn't want him to. At first, our interactions were polite but distant. He spent most of his time in his room or out with friends, and I didn't press him to engage. But as the weeks went on, he started spending more time around the house, finding reasons to linger in the kitchen while I cooked, or joining me in the living room while I read. "Your garden is impressive," he said one afternoon, leaning against the patio door as I tended to the roses. "Thank you," I replied, glancing up at him. "It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it." He stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight. "Do you do all of this yourself?" "Mostly," I said, brushing dirt off my gloves. "Richard isn't exactly the gardening type," Zachary smirked. "I can't imagine him getting his hands dirty." I laughed softly, surprised by how easily he made me smile. That's not his style. It was small moments like that, little exchanges that didn't seem like much at the time, that began to shift something between us. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way he moved through the house, the sound of his laughter, the way his presence filled the space in a way that Richard's never did. And then there were the times I'd catch him looking at me. Quick glances that lingered a beat too long before he looked away. The day of the towel incident was like any other. I had spent the morning tidying up and sorting laundry, my usual routine when Richard was at the office. I wasn't expecting Zachary to be home. He'd mentioned something about meeting a friend for lunch. I was heading toward the laundry room when the bathroom door opened, and he stepped out, a cloud of steam following him. His towel was slung low around his hips, his skin still damp from the shower. "Hey, Charlotte," he said casually as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hi," I replied, averting my eyes as I moved past him, and then it happened. The towel slipped, the knot unraveling, and before either of us could react, it fell to the floor. For a moment, neither of us moved. Zachary froze, his eyes wide, and I felt my cheeks flush as I realized what had just happened. Sorry," he stammered, bending down to grab the towel. "I didn't see anything," I blurted out, though the heat rising in my face betrayed me. "Right," he said, his voice strained as he wrapped the towel around himself again. I hurried away, my heart racing, and my thoughts a jumble of embarrassment and something else I didn't want to name. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. It was just an accident, I told myself. A fleeting, awkward moment that meant nothing. But the tension that lingered in the air said otherwise. When I saw him later that evening, sitting on the couch with his laptop, he looked up and gave me a small, tentative smile. I returned it, though my heart fluttered in a way that felt dangerous. We didn't speak about what had happened, but the unspoken awareness between us was impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, the dynamic between us shifted. Our conversations grew longer, our glances more frequent. There was a new weight to the air whenever we were alone, a quiet tension that neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. Richard remained oblivious, too caught up in his work to notice the subtle changes in the house. But I noticed. And so did Zachary. The incident with the towel might have been an accident, but the weight of it lingered in every interaction between us. Zachary and I had shared an awkward moment, but it was more than that. It had ignited something neither of us could name, but both of us could feel. In the days that followed, the tension between us grew. It wasn't something we spoke about, but it was there, in the way his gaze lingered when we passed each other, in the charged silence that hung in the air when we found ourselves alone. I told myself it was nothing, a silly infatuation born out of loneliness and too much time spent together. But deep down, I knew better. It happened for the first time one evening. Richard was working late, as usual, and the house was quiet. I was in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner, when Zachary walked in. He leaned against the counter, watching me with an intensity that made my hands tremble. "You don't have to do everything yourself, you know," he said, his voice softer than usual. I glanced at him, forcing a smile. "It keeps me busy." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You're always busy." "Someone has to be," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Zachary didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out, taking the dish towel from my hands. His fingers brushed mine, and the contact sent a jolt through me. "You never let anyone take care of you," he said quietly. His words caught me off guard, and I turned to face him, my chest tightening. "Zachary, But I couldn't finish the sentence. His gaze held mine, steady and unrelenting, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The first kiss was tentative, a quiet question neither of us dared to speak aloud. His lips brushed mine, soft and hesitant, and for a moment I froze. But then I kissed him back, and the floodgates opened. We pulled apart after a moment, both of us breathing heavily. "This is wrong," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his forehead resting against mine. "But I can't stop." Neither could I. What started as stolen moments in the kitchen quickly spiraled into something neither of us could control. We were careful at first, stealing glances and fleeting touches when no one else was around. But as the weeks went on, the intensity of our connection grew, and so did the risks we were willing to take. One afternoon, while Richard was at a client meeting, Zachary found me in the garden. I was pruning roses, the warm sun beating down on my back, when he appeared behind me. "You're always out here," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. "It's peaceful," I replied without turning around. Zachary stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "You're beautiful out here," he said softly. I turned to face him, my breath catching as I saw the way he was looking at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Zachary, we shouldn't." But before I could finish, he pulled me into his arms, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that left me breathless. The secrecy of our relationship only added to its intensity. We found ways to be together without raising suspicion. Quiet moments in the library, whispered conversations in the kitchen, fleeting touches in the garden. Every stolen moment felt like a rebellion against the roles we were supposed to play, a defiance of the rules that bound us. But the risks were always there, lurking in the background. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the sound of Richard's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of panic through both of us. "Go," I whispered, pushing Zachary toward the hallway. He slipped out just as the front door opened, and I quickly composed myself, pretending to read a book. "Miranda," Richard said as he walked in, his tone brisk. "Where's Zachary?" "In his room, I think," I replied, forcing a casual smile. Richard frowned but didn't press further, his attention already shifting to his laptop. The cracks in our secret began to show soon after. It started with small things. Richard's puzzled glances when he noticed Zachary and me talking in hushed tones, the way he lingered in doorways as if trying to catch something we weren't saying. Then there was Noah, Zachary's best friend, who had a way of showing up unannounced. "You've been spending a lot of time at home," Noah remarked one afternoon, his tone light but his gaze sharp. "Just helping out around the house." Zachary replied smoothly. Noah raised an eyebrow, his smirk faint. "Must be nice." The remark seemed innocuous, but the way his eyes flicked between us left me uneasy. The pressure of keeping our secret began to take its toll. One night, as we sat in the library, Zachary reached for my hand, his expression pained. "We can't keep hiding forever," he said. I shook my head, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "There's no other way." "There has to be," he insisted. "I'm not going to lose you, Charlotte." The conviction in his voice both comforted and terrified me. Our relationship was a delicate balancing act, one misstep away from disaster. But even as the risks grew, so did my feelings for him. I knew it couldn't last. But I also knew I couldn't let go. Secrets are heavy things, and as much as I tried to keep ours hidden, it began to seep into the cracks of our lives. The weight of what Zachary and I were doing wasn't just emotional. It was practical, tangible, a constant presence in the house. And the closer others got, the more I felt the walls closing in. The first complication came in the form of Noah, Zachary's best friend. Noah had a knack for showing up unannounced, his sharp wit and easy smile masking a subtle nosiness that made me uneasy. He seemed to have a sixth sense for tension, and every time he was in the house, I felt like I was walking on glass. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Noah wandered in, his usual air of casual charm surrounding him. "Smells good in here," he said, leaning against the counter. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone polite. He picked up an apple from the fruit bowl, tossing it in the air before taking a bite. "Zach's been spending a lot of time at home lately," he remarked, his gaze flicking to me. "He's helping me with some projects," I said, forcing a smile. "Nice of him," Noah said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Guess it's good to have some company with Richard gone so much." The comment sent a jolt through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "It's a big house," I replied. "Company is always nice." Noah studied me for a moment longer before grinning. "Well, I hope he's not slacking off too much. Zach's always been good at finding distractions." I laughed lightly, but the unease in my chest didn't fade. Then there was Cynthia, one of Richard's colleagues who had taken an unexpected interest in Zachary. Cynthia was everything I wasn't: young, ambitious, and unapologetically bold. She worked closely with Richard, often attending events and meetings with him, and she seemed to delight in making herself part of his world. "Zachary's quite charming, isn't he?" she remarked one evening during a dinner party at our house. I glanced at her, surprised by the comment. "He is," I replied carefully. She sipped her wine, her eyes glinting with amusement. "I think he's wasted sitting around here. Someone like him should be out there, making his mark." "I'm sure he'll find his way," I said, my tone clipped. Cynthia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I can see where he gets it from. You've got quite the presence yourself, Charlotte." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I excused myself as soon as I could. The pressure of keeping our secret grew with each passing day. Little things began to slip. Glances held too long, touches that lingered, the way Zachary's voice softened when he spoke to me. One evening, as I was tidying up the living room, Richard walked in unexpectedly. "You've been distracted lately," he said, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "I've just been busy," I replied, avoiding his gaze. "Too busy to join me for dinner the other night?" he pressed. "I wasn't feeling well," I lied, my stomach twisting under his scrutiny. Richard studied me for a moment before nodding. Well, let me know if there's anything I can do. His words seemed kind on the surface, but the edge in his tone left me unsettled. The breaking point came when Noah and Cynthia crossed paths at the house. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the garden pruning roses when I heard their voices drifting from the patio. "Zach's been spending a lot of time here," Noah was saying, his tone casual but probing. "He's helping out around the house," Cynthia replied, her voice light, "and keeping Charlotte company, from what I hear." My heart stopped, and I froze, straining to hear their conversation. "That's interesting," Noah said, his tone shifting slightly. "They do seem close." "Don't read too much into it," Cynthia replied with a laugh. "Charlotte's just lonely. Richard's never around." Their words hung in the air, heavy with implication, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. That evening, as Zachary and I sat in the library, I told him about what I'd overheard. "They're starting to notice," I said, my voice trembling. "Let them," Zachary replied, his tone firm. "They don't know anything. They're guessing, and it's only a matter of time before they figure it out," I said, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Zachary took my hand, his gaze steady. "We'll deal with it when it happens. I'm not letting them take this away from us." His confidence was reassuring, but the knot of fear in my chest refused to ease. The next week, Richard confronted me. "I got a call from Cynthia," he said, as he stood in the doorway of our bedroom, his arms crossed. "What about?" I asked, my heart racing. "She said there's been talk about you and Zachary," Richard said, his tone calm but cold. "Talk?" I repeated, feigning confusion. "People are saying you're too close," he said, his eyes narrowing. "That's ridiculous," I said quickly. "Zachary is your son. I've only ever tried to help him." Richard stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Are you sure about that, Charlotte?" My breath caught, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "Yes." The silence between us was suffocating, but eventually, Richard nodded. "Good. Because if I find out otherwise, there will be consequences." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and as he walked away, I felt the weight of his warning settle heavily on my shoulders. The pressure was mounting, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Noah's intuition, Cynthia's prying, Richard's suspicion. It all felt like a storm gathering on the horizon, and I wasn't sure if we could survive it. But even as the risks grew, so did my feelings for Zachary. And no matter how dangerous it became, I couldn't bring myself to let him go. By the time the storm finally broke, I could feel it brewing in every corner of the house. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to suffocate. It wasn't just the glances Richard was beginning to cast my way, or the subtle, loaded remarks from Cynthia and Noah. It was the way Zachary and I were fraying under the pressure. Secrets like ours don't stay hidden for long. It started with Richard's sudden interest in being home. He began coming home earlier than usual, often appearing in the kitchen or living room at odd hours, claiming he wanted to spend more time with his family. But his presence wasn't warm or comforting. It was calculated. I could feel his eyes on me, watching for cracks in my composure, waiting for me to slip. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Richard walked in and leaned against the counter. "Zachary hasn't been around much today," he remarked, his tone casual but probing. "He went into town to run errands," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Funny how he seems to disappear when I'm home," Richard said, his gaze sharp. I froze for a fraction of a second before forcing myself to continue arranging the silverware. "I'm sure that's just a coincidence," Richard hummed thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. "Coincidences have a way of piling up." The next blow came from Noah. He showed up late one evening, unannounced as usual, but this time his demeanor was different. He wasn't his usual charming, carefree self. Instead, he seemed tense, his eyes darting around the house as though searching for something. "Is Zach here?" he asked as I opened the door. "He's in his room," I said cautiously. Noah nodded, stepping inside. "Mind if I wait for him?" "Of course not," I said, though my chest tightened. As Noah sat in the living room, his gaze flicked to me. "You know, Charlotte, you've been good for Zach. He seems happier since moving in." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the unease creeping through me. "But sometimes," Noah continued, leaning back on the couch, "I wonder if it's you he's staying here for, and not his dad." The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out, and I struggled to maintain my composure. What are you implying, Noah? He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. Just an observation. Zach talks about you a lot, more than I'd expect. Before I could respond, Zachary appeared at the top of the stairs. Noah, he said sharply, his tone warning. Noah looked up, his smirk widening. Hey man, just catching up with Charlotte. Let's go, Zachary said, his jaw tight. As they left, I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling. Things came to a head when Richard finally confronted me. It was late, and I was in the library, pretending to read while my mind raced with worry. Richard walked in, his footsteps heavy, and shut the door behind him. We need to talk, he said, his voice cold. I set the book down, my heart pounding. What's this about? He stepped closer, his eyes dark with suspicion. Cynthia and Noah have been saying some interesting things about you and Zachary. Richard, you're not seriously listening to them, are you? I said, feigning indignation. You tell me, he snapped, his voice rising. Are they lying, or is there something going on between you and my son? I stood, my chest tightening. How dare you accuse me of something like that? Don't play innocent, Charlotte, he growled. I see the way he looks at you, and the way you look at him. My breath caught, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. You're paranoid. Maybe if you spent more time paying attention to this family instead of your business, you wouldn't be jumping to ridiculous conclusions. Richard's face twisted with anger, but before he could respond, the door opened, and Zachary stepped inside. What's going on? He asked, his voice steady but tense. Your father seems to think there's something inappropriate happening between us, I said, my voice trembling. Zachary's eyes flicked to Richard, his expression hardening. That's ridiculous. Is it? Richard challenged, stepping toward him. You've been acting strange for months, both of you. What am I supposed to think? You're supposed to trust your wife, Zachary shot back, but clearly you'd rather believe gossip. The room was thick with tension, and for a moment, none of us spoke. Then Richard turned to me, his eyes cold. If I find out there's any truth to this, Charlotte, you'll regret it. He stormed out, leaving Zachary and me alone. I sank into the chair, my hands shaking as Zachary knelt in front of me. This can't go on, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice firm. I won't let him do this to you. He's going to find out, I said, my voice breaking. And when he does, Zachary cupped my face in his hands, his gaze steady. Let him. I don't care anymore. I'm not going to lose you. His words were both comforting and terrifying, and as he pulled me into his arms, I knew we were running out of time. The next day, Richard announced that he was taking a week off work, a rare occurrence that sent a jolt of panic through me. Time to focus on what's important, he said, his gaze lingering on me as he spoke. I knew what he meant. He was going to watch us, wait for us to slip. And when we did, there would be no turning back. The week that followed was a quiet war, fought in the halls of the house. Richard's presence was suffocating, his every move calculated to keep me on edge. He spent his days shadowing us, his eyes sharp and his questions pointed. Every interaction with Zachary felt like a minefield, every word a potential spark that could ignite the tension simmering beneath the surface. The breaking point came late one evening. Richard had retired to his office, claiming he needed to review some documents. I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of tea I hadn't touched, when Zachary appeared. He didn't speak at first, but the weight of his presence was enough to draw my attention. We can't keep doing this, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Zachary stepped closer, his expression resolute. I'm not letting him control you like this. He's your father, I said, my voice trembling. He stopped being my father the moment he chose power over family, Zachary replied, his tone sharp. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Richard appeared in the doorway, his gaze flicking between us. What's going on here? He asked, his voice calm but deadly. Nothing, I said quickly, stepping back. Richard's eyes narrowed. Is that so? Because it doesn't look like nothing. Maybe you should ask yourself why you're so paranoid, Zachary said, his voice steady but laced with anger. Richard turned to him, his expression darkening. Watch your tone. Or what? Zachary challenged, stepping forward. You'll blame her for your failures again? That's all you ever do, isn't it? Blame everyone else for what you've ruined. Enough, Richard barked, his voice echoing through the kitchen. You think I don't see what's going on here? You think I'm blind? The silence that followed was deafening. I stepped between them, my hands trembling. Richard, please. Don't, he snapped, his gaze burning into me. Don't you dare defend him. Zachary grabbed my arm, pulling me behind him. She doesn't need to defend me. You're the one who's wrong here. Get out of my house, Richard said, his voice low and venomous. Zachary replied, his tone defiant. This is my family, my home, Richard said, his voice rising. And I will not let you destroy it. You already did? Zachary shot back. Long before I came back. The words hung in the air, and for a moment none of us spoke. Then Richard turned to me, his expression hard. You have a choice to make, Charlotte, he said coldly. Him or me. My heart pounded as I looked between them, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I knew that no matter what I chose, everything would change. I can't do this anymore, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I won't live like this. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the life I had built for the uncertain future that lay ahead. The night I walked away, the air outside was cold and biting. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay in that house another moment. Zachary followed silently, his footsteps steady behind me as we left everything we knew behind. We didn't speak until we reached the car. I stood there, my breath visible in the night air, my hands trembling as I clutched my coat tightly around me. You don't have to do this, Zachary said softly, his voice breaking the silence. I turned to him, tears spilling down my cheeks. What choice do I have? Staying means pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I can't keep lying, Zachary. Not to him, not to myself. He nodded, his jaw tightening. Then we'll figure it out. Together. I didn't respond, but I let him guide me into the passenger seat. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The days that followed were a blur. We rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a place where no one would think to look for us. The cabin was modest, with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, but it felt like a refuge, a space untouched by the chaos we had left behind. Zachary threw himself into finding work, his determination unwavering. I spent my days trying to piece together a sense of normalcy, but the weight of what I had done hung over me like a shadow. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Zachary reached for my hand. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. I shook my head, unable to meet his gaze. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again. He squeezed my hand, his grip firm. You will be. We both will. But the world doesn't let go of scandals so easily. A week after we left, my phone buzzed with messages and missed calls. The headlines were brutal. Business tycoon's wife abandons family home amid rumors of affair with Stepson. Richard's statement to the press was cold and calculated. I am focusing on moving forward, he had said, his tone heavy with implied betrayal. I stared at the article, my heart sinking. No matter how far we ran, the world would never forget what we had done. Zachary found me on the porch later that evening, the tablet with the article still in my lap. You can't let them control you, he said firmly, sitting beside me. It's not just about me, I replied, my voice trembling. It's about you too. They'll never stop judging us. Let them, he said, his gaze steady. They don't matter. What matters is what we have. I looked at him, his face lit by the soft glow of the porch light, and for the first time, I let myself believe that he might be right. As the weeks turned into months, we began to carve out a new life. It wasn't easy. The whispers followed us wherever we went, and there were days when the guilt threatened to consume me. But Zachary was always there, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. One evening, as we sat by the fire, he looked at me and smiled. I don't regret it, he said simply. Regret what? I asked, though I already knew. Any of it, he replied. Leaving, fighting, choosing you. I smiled faintly, the weight on my chest lifting just a little. I don't either. I thought I had the perfect excuse, a work trip to Dallas. It wasn't uncommon for me to travel for a few days, attending conferences or negotiating deals as part of my role as a regional manager for a finance company. My husband, Paul, barely questioned it anymore. After 25 years of marriage, we'd fallen into a routine, predictable, comfortable, maybe too comfortable. But as I walked into the glossy hotel lobby that evening, my suitcase rolling behind me, I froze. He was there, standing just a few feet away. My husband. Paul's face wasn't angry at first. It was blank, unreadable. But his eyes, those dark blue eyes that once made me weak at the knees, they were sharp, scanning me like I was an equation he needed to solve. He didn't say anything, didn't make a scene. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. My heart felt like it stopped. Then it raced. Panic kicked in, and my first instinct was to lie. Isn't that ironic? I'd lied to get here, and now I had to think fast to keep the story going. "Oh," I stammered, forcing a tight smile, "I didn't expect you to be here. What are you doing in Dallas?" His jaw twitched, and for a moment I thought he might actually laugh. Instead, his voice came out calm, too calm. "That's what I was going to ask you." I should have known better. Paul wasn't stupid. He was meticulous, observant, qualities that made him a brilliant architect but an even better reader of people. And I'd given him plenty of reasons to start reading between the lines lately. 2 weeks ago, when I told him I'd be gone for 3 days, his reaction had been odd. Not suspicious exactly, but measured. A pause too long before he nodded. A brief glance at his phone while I talked, like he was taking notes in his mind. Maybe I wanted him to notice. Maybe I wanted him to question me, because deep down, I knew I'd been slipping away from him. We both had. The thing is, I wasn't in Dallas for work. I was there for Daniel. It started innocently, or so I told myself. Daniel had been my first love, my college boyfriend, the one who got away. After a random Facebook friend request turned into a few late-night chats, I found myself looking forward to his messages. He was divorced now, running his own company, and traveling frequently. He made me feel seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. The messages turned into phone calls. The phone calls turned into a lunch date when he was in town for business. And then suddenly, I was booking a flight to meet him in Dallas, under the guise of work. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen. A kiss, a fling, closure. All I knew was that I wanted to feel something again. Anything. But now, staring into Paul's unflinching gaze, I realized how foolish I'd been. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Chloe," he said, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it that made me shiver. "Let's not do this here, upstairs, now." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words stuck in my throat. Paul didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and started walking toward the elevators, leaving me no choice but to follow. My legs felt like lead as I trailed behind him, the quiet ding of the elevator doors sounding like a death knell. As the doors closed behind us, the silence was suffocating. I could feel his tension, the restrained anger radiating off him. But what unnerved me most wasn't his anger, it was the way he still held himself together. Paul wasn't the type to explode. He was a planner, a strategist, and right now I was his target. When the elevator stopped and we stepped into his hotel room, he closed the door behind me with a soft click. Then, finally, he turned to face me. "Do you want to explain," he asked, his voice low, deliberate, "why you're here? And don't insult me by saying it's for work." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My brain scrambled for a plausible lie, but none of them sounded good enough for a man like Paul. A man who knew me better than anyone. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. "It's not what you think." He raised an eyebrow, his expression almost amused. "No? Then by all means enlighten me, Chloe. What is it?" And just like that, my carefully constructed plan, my perfect excuse, began to crumble. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Paul stood across from me, his arms crossed, his face calm in a way that only made my stomach twist harder. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, as if he was dissecting every thought in my head. "I'm waiting," he said, his voice low but firm. I fidgeted with the strap of my purse, my mind scrambling for a way out. Every excuse I came up with sounded hollow, weak. There was no way to sugarcoat what I had done. "I don't know what to say," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul tilted his head slightly, the faintest trace of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't humor, it was disbelief. "That's a first," he said. "You always know what to say, Chloe. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. So go ahead, tell me why you're here." The room felt smaller with every passing second, the tension between us tightening like a noose. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized just how much I had underestimated him. Paul wasn't the kind of man to let things slide. I should have known he would figure it out. I came to see someone, I confessed, my voice shaking. He didn't flinch, didn't react at all. He just stared at me, his eyes unblinking. Who? It's not important, I said quickly. A feeble attempt to protect myself from the inevitable fallout. Paul let out a short, humorless laugh. Not important? You lied to me, Chloe. You lied about a business trip to come to Dallas and check into a hotel? I think I deserve to know who the hell is so important that you'd risk everything for them. I hesitated, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. It's someone I used to know, from before we met. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw the crack in his calm exterior. A man. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. He took a deep breath, his hands running through his hair as he turned away from me. For a moment, I thought he might leave, walk out the door and end this right then and there. But he didn't. Instead, he walked to the window and stared out at the city lights, his back to me. How long? He asked after a long silence. What? How long have you been talking to him? His voice was steady, controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. A few months, I admitted, my voice barely audible. And today, he said, turning back to face me, what was today supposed to be? A reunion? A fling? Were you going to sleep with him? His words cut through me like a knife. Paul, it's not like that. Don't, he interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. Don't lie to me again, Chloe. Not now. I looked at him, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't know what I was thinking. I felt so disconnected from us, from you. And when Daniel reached out. Daniel, he repeated, his lips curling into a bitter smile. Of course it's Daniel, the college boyfriend, the one who got away. How fucking poetic. I flinched at his tone, but I didn't argue. What could I say? He was right. Paul paced the room, his movements sharp and restless. You felt disconnected, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. And what? You thought meeting up with some ex was the solution? You didn't think to talk to me? To tell me how you felt? I tried, I said, my voice breaking. I tried so many times, Paul, but you were always too busy, too distracted. I felt invisible. Invisible. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes narrowing. You think I don't feel the same way? You think I haven't noticed how distant you've been? How you look at me like I'm just another piece of furniture in the house? This didn't happen overnight, Chloe. We both let this happen. I opened my mouth to respond, but the lump in my throat made it impossible to speak. He was right again. As much as I wanted to blame him for everything, I knew I wasn't innocent in this. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of everything we hadn't said over the years hung heavy in the air between us. Did you love him? Paul asked suddenly, his voice softer now. No, I said without hesitation. I didn't come here because I love him. I came here because I was scared. Scared of what we've become. Scared that we've lost each other. Paul studied me, his expression unreadable. And now? I don't know, I whispered. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing my words. Then, to my surprise, he stepped closer to me, his gaze locking onto mine. I should be furious with you, he said, his voice low but intense. And I am. But I'm also furious with myself. Because I let this happen. I let you feel like you had to find something outside of us to feel alive again. I swallowed hard, his words hitting me harder than I expected. But if you think I'm going to just walk away, he continued, his eyes blazing, you don't know me as well as you think you do. Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his hand cupping my chin as he forced me to look at him. You're mine, Chloe, he said, his voice a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. And I'm not giving up on you. On us. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel tonight. Hope. Paul's hand lingered on my chin for a moment too long, his grip firm but not rough. I could feel his anger radiating off him, but it wasn't the only thing in the room now. Something else, something dangerous and magnetic, hung in the air between us. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The way he looked at me was different. Intense. Not the Paul I'd grown used to over the years, the one who buried himself in blueprints and deadlines. This Paul felt raw, unpredictable, like a fire that had been smoldering for too long and was finally breaking free. He let his hand drop, but his eyes never left mine. You think you can just slip away from me? That you can lie to my face and run into someone else's arms without consequences? His voice was low, steady, but there was an edge to it that made my knees weak. I took a step back, bumping into the corner of the bed. Paul, don't, he cut me off, his tone sharper now. Don't give me some half-baked excuse, Chloe. You want to talk about feeling invisible? You want to talk about what's wrong with us? Fine, let's talk. But don't you dare think for a second that I'm going to let you walk out of this room until we're done. I froze, his words hitting me like a slap. There was no escape, no clever line that could diffuse this moment. And the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. Paul stepped closer, towering over me, his presence both intimidating and intoxicating. Why him, Chloe? He asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. What did he offer you that I couldn't? It wasn't about him, I said, my voice trembling. It was about me. I felt lost, like I wasn't enough anymore, like we weren't enough. And you thought sneaking around behind my back would fix that? His tone was sharp, but his eyes told a different story. There was anger, yes, but also hurt, vulnerability. I don't know what I thought, I admitted, tears stinging my eyes. I missed feeling wanted, needed. I missed feeling alive, Paul. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might explode. But instead, he surprised me. He reached out, his hand sliding to the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our faces were inches apart. You think I don't want you? He said, his voice low and rough. You think I don't need you? God, Chloe, I've been drowning in you since the day I met you. My breath hitched, his words cutting through every wall I had built around myself. I wanted to respond, to say something, anything, but he didn't give me the chance. His lips crashed against mine, fierce and demanding, and all the air left my lungs. I gasped, my hands instinctively gripping his arms for balance. The kiss wasn't soft or gentle, it was raw, desperate, like he was trying to remind me of everything we'd lost, and everything we still had. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath heavy. Do you feel that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tell me you feel that. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I feel it, I whispered, my voice cracking. Good, he said, his hands sliding down to my waist. Because I'm not letting you go. Not tonight, not ever. Before I could process his words, he lifted me effortlessly, laying me down on the bed. The room spun, and for a brief moment I forgot everything. Daniel, the lies, the guilt. All that existed was Paul and the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. The hours that followed felt like a blur, a haze of tangled limbs, heated whispers, and the kind of passion that I thought we had left behind years ago. Paul's touch was different tonight, not hurried or distracted, but deliberate, reverent, as if he was rediscovering every inch of me, relearning what made me gasp, what made me shiver. You don't get to disappear on me, Chloe, he murmured against my skin, his voice thick with emotion. You don't get to run away when things get hard. I wasn't running, I managed to say, my breath hitching as his hands explored places that had long been neglected. Yes, you were, he said, his lips brushing against my collarbone. But I won't let you. Not anymore. There was a fire in him tonight, one that I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just anger or jealousy, it was determination. A refusal to let us slip away without a fight. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the Chloe I used to be. The Chloe who laughed too loud, who believed in love and passion, who looked at Paul like he was the center of her universe. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights spilling through the curtains. Paul's arm was draped over me, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my bare shoulder. Neither of us spoke for a long time, the silence filled with the unspoken truths we weren't ready to face yet. But in that moment, words didn't feel necessary. Finally, Paul broke the silence. I'm not going to pretend this fixes everything, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But I need you to know something. I've never stopped wanting you, Chloe. Never. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I didn't bother to wipe them away. I don't deserve you, I whispered. Maybe not, he said with a small, tired smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. I let out a shaky laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in what felt like months. And for the first time since I'd walked into that hotel lobby, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel tonight. Hope. The days following that night at the hotel felt surreal. I thought Paul would distance himself, that the weight of my betrayal would push him away despite the passion we shared. But I was wrong. If anything, it seemed to ignite something in him, a determination I hadn't seen in years. I don't know when it started, but he became different, bolder, more unpredictable. He wasn't waiting for me to make the next move. Instead, he seemed intent on making sure I never forgot what had happened between us that night. It started with a simple text. Huh? Lunch today, 1 p.m., don't be late. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. This wasn't like him. Paul wasn't the type to send messages like this, not since our dating years. His texts were usually practical, updates about the kids, reminders about appointments. Not this. Me. Where? Paul, you'll see. The mystery made my stomach flip. At exactly 1 p.m., I found myself walking into a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown. Paul was already there, sitting at a table near the back, his sleeves rolled up and a glass of red wine in his hand. He looked up when I walked in, his lips curling into a small, knowing smile. You're late, he said, as I slid into the chair across from him. It's 1:02, I replied, trying to sound casual. 2 minutes too long, he said, his voice low and teasing. I felt my cheeks flush, the tension between us palpable. He didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. I've made a reservation for Friday night, he said. Same hotel, same room. My breath caught. Paul, we can't just… Yes, we can, he interrupted, his tone firm. You said you wanted to feel alive again, so do I. And I'm not letting us slip back into the rut we were in. Not now, not after this. I wanted to protest, to tell him this was reckless, but the truth was, I didn't want to say no. Friday night came faster than I expected. I found myself walking into that same hotel, my pulse racing as I approached the elevator. Paul was waiting for me at the door of the suite, his tie already loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The moment I stepped inside, he pulled me into his arms, his lips capturing mine with the same intensity he'd shown that first night. You're late again, he murmured against my mouth. Maybe I like making you wait, I shot back, surprising even myself. His low chuckle sent shivers down my spine. Careful, Chloe, he said, his voice thick with warning. You might not like what happens when you push me. But I did. I liked it more than I was ready to admit. These secret meetings became our escape, our way of reconnecting in ways I hadn't thought possible. Sometimes it was a hotel room, other times it was somewhere riskier. Once, he showed up at my office. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon, and I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant buzzed me. Your husband is here, she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. I frowned. Paul never visited me at work. Send him in, I said, already feeling my heart pick up pace. When he walked through the door, he looked every bit the confident, composed man I had fallen in love with years ago. But there was something else in his eyes now. Something darker, more daring. Paul, what are you doing here? I asked, standing from my desk. He closed the door behind him and locked it, his gaze never leaving mine. I was in the neighborhood, he said casually, but the way he was looking at me told a different story. Paul, I started, my voice faltering as he crossed the room. Relax, he said, his lips curving into a wicked smile. I just wanted to remind you who you belong to. Before I could respond, his hands were on me, his lips crashing against mine in a kiss that left no room for argument. I knew it was reckless. My assistant was just outside and anyone could walk in. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt desired, craved, alive. But it wasn't just about the passion. Paul started doing things he hadn't done in years. He left little notes for me around the house, on the bathroom mirror, in my purse, even tucked into my lunch. You look beautiful this morning. Counting the hours until I see you tonight. Don't forget. You're mine. Each note made my heart flutter, a stark contrast to the guilt that lingered in the back of my mind. And then, there were the unexpected moments of tenderness. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Paul came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. He didn't say anything, just held me, his chin resting on my shoulder. I missed this, he finally said, his voice soft. Missed what? I asked, leaning into him. Us, he said simply. But it wasn't all perfect. The shadow of what I'd done still lingered, and Daniel wasn't making it easy to move on. He called me one afternoon, his number popping up on my phone, like a ghost from a past I was trying to bury. Against my better judgment, I answered. Chloe, he said, his voice smooth and familiar. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I'm fine, I said quickly, my tone clipped. Are you? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I can't stop thinking about Dallas. About us. There is no us, I said firmly. Whatever I thought this was, it's over. You don't sound so sure, he said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. I am, I said, and for the first time I meant it. I hung up before he could say anything else, my hands shaking as I set my phone down. When Paul came home that evening, he noticed immediately that something was off. Chloe, he said, his voice gentle as he cupped my face in his hands. What's wrong? Nothing, I lied, forcing a smile. He studied me for a moment, his eyes searching mine. You're a terrible liar, he said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. But I'll let it slide, for now. His words sent a shiver down my spine. A reminder that Paul wasn't the kind of man to let things go easily. And as much as I wanted to believe that the worst was behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. I thought I was in control of the situation. Or at least, I thought I had a handle on how things were unfolding between Paul and me. But life has a funny way of reminding you just how little control you really have. It happened on a Sunday morning, one of those rare, lazy days when the world felt like it had slowed down. Paul and I were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. The kids were out for the weekend. One at college, the other staying with a friend, leaving the house eerily quiet. I was about to ask Paul if he wanted to go for a walk when he casually placed his phone on the table. The screen was unlocked and a message thread was open. At first, I didn't register what I was looking at. But then I saw the name at the top of the thread. Daniel. My stomach dropped. Paul didn't say anything at first. He just leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his coffee mug. His expression was calm, too calm. How long were you planning on telling me the truth? He asked, his voice even, almost detached. I stared at him, my mouth dry. What are you talking about? He tilted his head slightly, giving me a look that made it clear he wasn't in the mood for games. Don't insult me, Chloe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I glanced at his phone again, my heart pounding in my chest. The messages were all there, plain as day. Daniel had been texting him, not me. And judging by the length of the thread, it wasn't a new conversation. You, I trailed off, my voice shaking. You've been talking to him? Paul nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee before setting the mug down. For weeks now, he said. I reached out to him the day after I caught you at the hotel. I needed to know what kind of man he was. What kind of man you thought was worth risking everything for. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Paul, You didn't think I'd figure it out, did you? He interrupted. His tone sharper now. You didn't think I'd notice how distant you'd become, how distracted you were. And when you told me you were going to Dallas, I knew something wasn't right. So I followed you. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. You followed me? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he said, unapologetic. And thank God I did. Because if I hadn't, you'd still be sneaking around behind my back, pretending everything was fine. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was spinning, trying to process what he was telling me. Paul leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. Do you know what he said when I confronted him? He asked, his voice low and cold. I shook my head, unable to speak. He said you didn't love him, Paul continued, his eyes boring into mine. He said you were confused, that you didn't know what you wanted, and for some reason I believed him. But now, looking at you, I'm not so sure. Paul, why? He interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. Why him, Chloe? Was it because he made you feel something I couldn't? Or was it just easier to run away than to face what was broken between us? Tears spilled down my cheeks, and I hated myself for it. It wasn't about him, I said, my voice shaking. It was never about him. It was about me. I felt empty. Like I was just going through the motions, day after day. And when Daniel reached out, it was like a lifeline, like someone finally saw me again. Paul closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. I saw you, he said quietly. I've always seen you. But you stopped looking at me, Chloe. You stopped letting me in. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped trying. I had let the weight of life and routine build a wall between us, and instead of tearing it down, I had turned to someone else to fill the void. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking. I know that's not enough, but it's the truth. I'm so sorry, Paul. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up, pacing the kitchen like he was trying to work through his emotions. When he finally stopped, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of anger, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite place. This can't happen again, he said, his voice firm. If we're going to fix this, if there's even a chance of fixing this, you have to let him go. Completely. I already have, I said quickly. I ended it after that night. I haven't spoken to him since. Paul studied me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe me. Finally, he nodded. Good, because I'm not sharing you, Chloe. Not with him. Not with anyone. There was something possessive in his tone, something that made my skin prickle. But instead of feeling trapped, I felt relieved. Like this was the wake-up call I had been waiting for. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Paul turned to me, his hands sliding over mine. I'm not perfect, he said quietly. I know I've made mistakes too. I let work consume me. I stopped showing you how much you mean to me, but I'm done with that. I'm done taking you for granted. I looked at him, my heart breaking all over again. Paul, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he said firmly. Because I don't want to lose you, Chloe, and if that means fighting like hell to keep you, then that's what I'll do. His words brought fresh tears to my eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of guilt or regret. They were tears of hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance, like we could rebuild what we had lost. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Daniel might be out of my life, but the cracks in our marriage were still there, waiting to be mended. And whether or not we could truly fix them, only time would tell. The days following Paul's confrontation felt heavy but different. There was a new tension between us, but it wasn't the quiet, smothering kind that had crept into our marriage over the years. This was electric, charged with something raw, a mix of anger, passion, and the undeniable pull of two people who still cared too much to let go. I deleted Daniel's number that night. I even went a step further, blocking him on every platform I could think of. It wasn't because Paul asked me to, it was because I knew I had to. The chapter with Daniel was closed, and it was time to face the reality I had been avoiding for too long. Paul wasn't a man of empty promises. When he said he was going to fight for us, he meant it. He started coming home earlier, leaving his work at the office instead of letting it bleed into our evenings. He suggested we go out more, even if it was just for a walk or a drink at the bar we used to frequent when we were younger. At first, it felt awkward, like trying to reconnect with a stranger. We'd sit across from each other at dinner, struggling to fill the silence with small talk. But slowly, the walls began to come down. One night, we were sitting on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine after the kids had gone to bed. Paul leaned back, his arm draped over the back of the couch, and gave me a small teasing smile. Remember our first date? He asked, swirling his wine glass. I laughed, the memory flooding back. How could I forget? You spilled red wine all over my dress. It wasn't my fault, he said, grinning. The waiter bumped into me. Sure, blame the waiter, I said, rolling my eyes. And then you spent the rest of the night apologizing and trying to scrub it out with club soda. He chuckled, shaking his head. I was so nervous that night. I thought I'd ruined my chances with you. You almost did, I said, smirking. But then you kissed me in the parking lot, and I figured I'd give you another shot. His smile softened, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away. I'd forgotten how good we were together back then, he said quietly. Before life got in the way. I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers with his. We can be good again, Paul, I said. I want to be good again. But rebuilding wasn't easy. There were moments when the guilt would creep back in, when I'd see the flicker of doubt in Paul's eyes, and wonder if he could ever fully forgive me. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you think you'll ever trust me again? Paul was quiet for a long time before he answered. I want to, he said. I'm trying, but trust isn't something you rebuild overnight, Chloe. It's going to take time. For both of us. I nodded, my throat tight. I understand. I want you to know that I'm all in. No more lies. No more secrets. I'm here, Paul. Completely. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I believe you, he said softly. And I'm all in too, whatever it takes. The turning point came a few weeks later. Paul surprised me with a weekend getaway. A small cabin by the lake, far away from the demands of work and the reminders of everything we'd been through. It was just the two of us, no distractions, no excuses. We spent our days hiking, cooking together, and sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Paul pulled me into his lap on the porch swing. He wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low and steady. About what? I asked, leaning into him. About us, he said. About how easy it would have been to walk away. But I don't want easy, Chloe. I want you. I've always wanted you. Tears filled my eyes and I turned to look at him, my hand cupping his face. I don't deserve you, Paul, I said, my voice shaking. Maybe not, he said with a small smile. But we don't get to choose who we love, and I choose you. Every time. I kissed him then, slow and deep, pouring everything I couldn't put into words into that moment. When we returned home, things weren't perfect, but they were better. We started seeing a counselor together, something neither of us had ever considered before. It wasn't easy to dredge up the past to confront the ways we had both failed each other. But it was necessary. Through it all, Paul remained patient, steady, and in turn, I worked harder than I ever had to prove to him and to myself that I was worth the second chance he had given me. One evening, as we sat in the backyard watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Paul reached for my hand. Do you ever think about that night at the hotel? He asked, his voice soft. All the time, I admitted. He looked at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. I'm glad I was there, he said. Because if I hadn't caught you, I don't think we'd be sitting here right now. I smiled back, squeezing his hand. Me too, I said. As strange as it sounds, that night, it saved us. Paul nodded, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. It did, but it wasn't just that night, Chloe. It's everything we've done since then. The work, the fights, the tears, it's all of it. And he was right. Our story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated, full of mistakes and second chances. But it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. I didn't know where we were heading that night at the hotel. But now, sitting here with Paul, I know one thing for sure. I'm alive, and I'm his. Just as much as he's mine.